Hi, I'm Alexandra Crosswell, the Executive Director of the Stress Measurement Network. Our network is a group of psychological scientists that have come together to try and improve the measurement of psychosocial stress in research studies. Our network is funded by the National Institute on Aging. Today, I'm going to walk you through the resources that our group has compiled over the past 4 years. The resources are made for research scientists like yourself with the hopes that you will use it and take advantage of these tools to help improve your own measurement of psychosocial stress and analysis of existing measures of stress in longitudinal studies. The ultimate goal is to help us understand how exposures to stressful events and life events and responses to those stressful events influence trajectories of aging. We look forward to receiving your input on these tools and hope that they are useful for your research. Thanks. About some of the products that the Stress Measurement Network has created. All of these products can be found at our website, stresscenter.ucsf.edu. Before I dive into the products, I'm going to first point you to a new model of how stressful events and stress responses lead to health and aging outcomes. So this model was developed by the leadership team of the Stress Measurement Network, which is made up primarily of health and social psychologists. And our goal here was to outline the current empirical evidence and our thinking on the processes by which these stress exposures and stress responses influence daily level factors that create allostatic load of the physiological state, which then eventually lead to biological aging and potentially early disease. This paper was published in Frontiers in Neuroendocrinology and outlines the existing evidence and remaining questions for this model. I'd like to talk to you today about 4 different products that our network has worked on over the past several years. The first product I'm going to talk about is the Stress Measurement Toolbox. This toolbox can be found at our website, stresscenter.ucsf.edu, by clicking on the Recommended Measures tab. The goal of this toolbox was to create a repository of stress measures. This is different than other existing measurement toolboxes because what we asked reviewers to do and authors to do was to create a brief, informal summary of stress measures within a variety of domains of stress types. So as you can see in the list, we asked authors to write about different types of stressors within a variety of categories, such as past stress exposures, current or chronic stressors, current acute and daily stressors, and stress-related biomarkers. Within each of these categories, we had different stress types and invited authors who are experts in those areas to write about how to best measure that construct using a short self-report scale for the psychological constructs and biomarker measurement for the biomarker assessments. Each author was then asked to get their colleagues to review these measurement summaries in order to provide further feedback. Here's an example of one of the entries. This one was written by Dr. Wendy Mendez, where she outlines the differences in the different conceptual ideas behind stigma, discrimination, and vigilance for bias in that first paragraph, and then talks about the differences and nuances between different measures of these constructs. So as you can see, 2 of the first measures she describes are the everyday discrimination and perceived discrimination scales. She provides a downloadable document for those scales, the reference, as well as a brief summary of what each measures and how they may be different than other measures that capture similar constructs. This is a living document, meaning we welcome your input. We provide the author's contact at the end of each of these summaries, with hopes that people will comment to the author, suggesting new measures or providing further context that they feel is needed in the description of existing measures. I'm going to talk about today is the stress typology. There's been criticism in the stress literature that the word stress has become almost completely unhelpful because of how broad of a term it is, and it's used for many different purposes. So the word stress is applied to events that occur, such as natural disasters. It's also applied to daily level experiences, such as arguing with a spouse. What we've tried to do is develop a tool to help refine the language of stress. And we did this by first trying to identify what are the core elements or components of existing stress measures. This tool was published in an appendix of that paper I mentioned earlier, Eppel et al. In Frontiers of Neuroendocrinology 2018, with the idea that it would be used as a resource as you are writing your methodological sections of papers, results sections, and even choosing different measures. I'm going to go into further detail because obviously this text is small, but the idea is that you would be able to look at this tool and find the words to describe the measure or the construct that you're trying to put words to. The very first key component in our typology is the difference between stress exposure versus a stress response. So an exposure is a concrete time-based event, such as an argument with a friend, or such as the September 11th terrorist attacks. These are time-limited, discrete events with a start and stop. The stress response is a response to such an event. These can be cognitive, affective, physiological responses that are captured in a set amount of time in order to capture the response to those events. This typology first differentiates characteristics of the stress exposure and then separately characteristics of the stress response. To go into further detail, stress exposure characteristics include the time scale of the stressor. Is it an acute event? Was it a daily event or hassle? A life event or a chronic stressor? And our typology defines each of these in the extensive paper. Another key characteristic is the life period. There's been a lot of work looking at the influence of stressful events in childhood. You can also look at events in utero, and then again in adulthood or across the lifespan. The assessment window for these exposures is important. The measurement time frame in particular. When people are measuring stressors, it's important to capture when are you asking. So if you're asking somebody whether they've ever had the death of a loved one, are you asking whether they've had the death of a loved one in the past year or in their entire lifetime, for example. There's also many attributes of that stressor, such as how long it lasted, the severity of it, which can be objectively coded, how controllable it was, in which life domains, such as home life or work, the target of the stressor, was it targeted at the self or other, and importantly, the potential of the stressor to elicit a harmful emotional response, such as the social threat, interpersonal loss, or physical threat or danger aspects. And these, again, can be objectively rated by a coder. The psychological and behavioral responses to these stressors, these characteristics include affective, emotional, cognitive, and physiological responses. We have categorized these subjective stress experiences within this response because we think of it as a response to your environment. And that is usually captured with the perceived stress scale developed by Cohen, which is an extensively used self-report scale where people report on their general levels of global subjective stress. You can also capture subjective stress within specific life domains, such as work stress measures. And then more tied to the acute stress response, you can capture subjective and behavioral responses to specific stimuli or events by capturing motivational states, emotional responses, cognitive appraisals, which can be captured either before or after the event, how people cope with that event, the different regulation attempts to regulate emotions, and perseverative cognitions, which capture anticipatory worry before an event and also rumination after an event. The idea with the stress typology is that it would provide a common language to help us refine our description of stress when we're talking about it in research studies. It describes the important conceptual dimensions of stress. We are currently working on a second version of it because we think that these conceptual dimensions can be further refined. We hope that researchers who are describing any type of psychological stressor, exposure, or response would use this as a reference to help refine their own language. And it can also be used as a tool when choosing a measure to really make sure that you are capturing the different characteristics and components of the stressor that you intend to. We feel that refining the language is important for building a cumulative science of stress and identifying the critical theoretical dimensions that are of stressors that are important for links to longitudinal health trajectories. The product I'm going to talk about today are products from the Health and Retirement Study Data Harmonization Project that we're working on in collaboration with Jin Cook Lee at the University of Southern California. The Health and Retirement Study is a longitudinal study in the US, and it has a series of sister studies across the world, approximately 10 studies that have been developed in collaboration with the HRS in order to capture similar constructs and track individuals over time. The Gateway to Global Aging project, which is led by Jin Cook Lee, is a platform, an online platform for this population survey data on aging around the world. So the idea is that there's one place, this Gateway to Global Aging website, where you can go to access information about all of these HRS families of studies. Jin Cook Lee has led a tremendous project to harmonize across these studies. And by harmonize, we mean to identify what variables and constructs can be compared or harmonized in analyses across all of these studies. So Jin Cook has led this effort to harmonize across all these studies for a variety of different constructs, including cognitive outcomes, employment, demographics, financial and housing and wealth, retirement, health, importantly, health outcomes, income, and as you can see in this bottom right corner, our group has worked with her team to add stress and psychosocial content to her harmonization efforts. The initial work on this project was led by Tara Grunwald, of Chapman University, where her and her team went through every item at every wave for every one of these studies listed here to identify which of these studies have items that capture a stressful experience that falls within these core stress domains. And the stress domains we focused on were stressful life events and traumas, chronic strains, job strain or job stress, discrimination, social strain and unsupportive relationships, loneliness, and environmental or neighborhood disorder and lack of cohesion. These were chosen because of their evidence linking these types of stress to worse health. Tara's group created a very extensive user manual that describes each of the items and down to the wording of the item and the response scale of the item within each of these domains of stress across all of the different studies. On Jin Cook Lee's team side, what they then did was took that manual and created a data codebook for it where they outlined every single one of the items and produced a very user-friendly website where you can select each of the data sets, each of the waves, and which specific types of stress you're interested in. Data was then harmonized down to the item level, and by harmonized data we mean that every single item that was included in the stress measure manual was compared for both the wording, the accuracy and similarity of the wording across studies, as well as the response scale. And if those two were deemed by a panel of experts to be similar enough, those were harmonized so that they can be compared cross-culturally. The potential of this harmonized data is that we can look at differences in stress exposures and responses by geography and by socio-demographic group, knowing that we're looking and comparing apples to apples. We can also compare cultural differences in the association between exposures and responses and different aging outcomes, and we can replicate findings to see what is universal and what isn't. The data manual, the data codebook, and the actual harmonized downloadable data for these studies can be accessed at the gatewaytoaging.org. This is a tremendous resource that took years and years of incredibly detailed effort, and we hope that people will begin to utilize this data. product of the stress measurement network I'm only going to talk about briefly. This is our effort to develop new measures. One of the needs in stress research is to find ways to capture experiences of stress in novel and innovative ways. We have funded a variety of pilot projects to try and capture stress in new ways, such as funding projects that are capturing stress at the physiological level, using wearable technology, a study trying to capture unconscious aspects of stress using an implicit attitudes test, as well as the development of new self-report measures. One of the new measures that I'm going to briefly talk about is our effort to create a stress battery 1.0. The idea with this project was that epidemiological and population studies need to improve the variety of stress types that they're capturing in order to capture the wide range of stress experiences and exposures that people are exposed to throughout their life. So we tried to create a brief battery of validated stress scales that captures a wide range of stress types. This project is led by Stephanie Mayer and can be contacted at stephaniemayer@ucsf.edu for those of you who are interested in access to this measure. She first identified health-relevant key stress domains. These domains are very similar to the domains listed both in the toolbox measures and also in the HRS Health and Retirement Study Harmonization Project. She identified within those domains what are the existing short measures that assess the construct. And when she put that together in a short battery, it takes approximately 20 minutes. This is too long for large epidemiological studies, which need to cover a wide range of topics. This is too long for participants to complete. So she's working currently with a psychometrician to try and refine that battery and bring it down to approximately 10 minutes. That's the end of our presentation today. We thank you for listening. We hope that you can take advantage of some of these products. Please visit our website to learn more. Again, I'm the Executive Director of the Stress Measurement Network. Please contact me at alexandra.crosswell@ucsf.edu. I'd love your feedback and welcome it. And thank you again to our network leadership for their tireless efforts in creating these products that we hope will be a great contribution to the field. Thank you.